So we're on the draw here. I'm going to keep Thoughtseize. We can use that to take a peek at what's going on with what our opponent's doing. Although our opponent's cracking a Polluted Delta, perhaps this is a mirror match. It looks like it looks like this is going to be a mirror. So see how this plays out. But our opponent doesn't have anything. We have to be worried about our opponent's stubborn denials. So I'm a little bit wary of casting the Thoughtseize right now and running it into a potential stubborn denial. So I'm just going to play Fetch Land Go. What this does is, first of all, we have a stubborn denial of our own. Our opponent might just Thought Scour, which that's fine if that's what our opponent has, but we have a lot going on here. And it looks like, okay, so our opponent is going to go for the Thought Scour. And I'm going to let that resolve. Perhaps alright, so our opponent does have a discard spell here, and we can stubborn denial this Inquisition. We don't see a second land yet, so hopefully our opponent just doesn't have a second land. But we definitely want to stubborn denial this. We don't want to show our hand, give away lots of information. And our opponent probably should have just played that second land before casting the Inquisition. Perhaps this is a Death Shadow. Perhaps it's another discard spell. Perhaps it's a Delve spell. Looks like it might be a Delve spell. Yep, so it's going to be a Tasker. And our opponent's definitely ahead, but we can afford to take a hit, especially since we just drew this Death Shadow. And go ahead and Thought Scour. Just give us a little bit more information on our own hand before casting this copy of Thoughtseize. So just a Bolt and then a Death Shadow. We're clearly going to take away our opponent's Death Shadow and leave our opponent with only a Lightning Bolt. So I like that. We can set up for a pretty good turn on our next turn. So our opponent can attack us, but that kind of helps us in many ways because it's going to make our Death Shadow larger. So what we can do here is cast both the Gurmag Angler and the Death Shadow. And I do think that's what we want to do. Leave the Stubborn Denial in case we draw Snapcaster Mage. We might want to get it back, so I'll leave that in the graveyard. And this is a pretty big turn for us. Two 5-power threats. And our opponent would love to be able to activate this Tasker, but they may just not have time. Our opponent basically is going to be using this Tasker as a chump blocker as of right now. What we're worried about are cards like Fatal Push. If our opponent has a Death Shadow of their own, that would be pretty good. And if our opponent does attack with this Tasker, they're probably trying to trade something like a Lightning Bolt or a Kozilek's or Colligan's command, sorry, for one of our creatures. Think we can afford to lose the Gurmag Angler. So I am going to block with it. We have a Colligan's command of our own. And we don't want to get, say, Bolt plus K commanded out of this game. So if our opponent simply has a Lightning Bolt for the Gurmag Angler, that's not the end of the world. And we already know about the Lightning Bolt, so I should say we know our opponent has the Bolt. We would rather it be used killing off our creatures, but it looks like also a K command as well. And that's going to get back a Death Shadow, and our opponent looks like that's just going to be put right into play. So that's a little bit troublesome. But we found a Fatal Push now off this Thought Scour and a Bolt of our own. So we actually do have lethal. So we simply Fatal Push away our opponent's Death Shadow. Make this attack. And the Lightning Bolt will finish off our opponent. So, pretty straightforward. Our cards lined up a little bit better than our opponents in that particular game. Looking at the sideboard, we're pretty well constructed for the matchup. I do like the spell bombs. Typically, Death Shadow decks do use their graveyards in some manner, whether it's Snapcaster Mage or Colligan's Command, or one of the big Delve creatures. So I like the spell bombs. Stubborn Denials are okay. You don't really want to be loading up on those. They do help protect a Death Shadow or a Tasker or an Angler once they're in play. K commands aren't great. But they do help you grind out a longer game. So it's kind of about shaving numbers in this sort of a matchup. I don't really like the Lightning Bolt because while it can kill your opponent, most of the time when you play a Death Shadow or a Tasker or a Gurmag, it's already gonna... You're talking about five toughness creatures already, or a Death Shadow, which is likely going to be more than a 3/3. So I'm just going to cut a Serum Visions, which it's weird, but I think Thought Scour is a little bit more useful a lot of the time because of the Delve creatures. So, and we're on the draw, so we can afford to be shaving a little bit of our card draw. So I'm going to cut a Visions and a Bolt. I actually like the 2 K commands and 2 Stubborns. So I'm not going to do too much else. Just boarding in these spell bombs. And that's going to be it. The K commands, they can help you grind out games where if your opponent if you're killing your opponent's Death Shadows and they're killing yours, sometimes K command is a trump if the game goes long. So I like keeping 2 in. We are still a Snapcaster K command deck. The reason why they're not great is because they're not actually killing things, and they're basically the most important mode on the K command in this matchup is being able to return a creature from the graveyard. So we're going to be hit with the Thoughtseize here to start. And it'll be interesting to see what exactly our opponent takes. If our opponent doesn't take the Inquisition, that would be a little bit unusual because the Inquisition is our way of seeing what's going on in our opponent's hand. Without it, we're kind of operating blind while our opponent has a lot of information. So as expected, they are going to go ahead and take our Inquisition of Kozilek, which makes sense. Here's a Street Wraith. I'm going to cycle it Just in case we do draw a discard spell, we might want to just go ahead and cast it, but we did not find one. So I'm gonna go ahead and Serum Visions, because the Scry 2, we may want to position ourselves. And so I think it's easily putting the Polluted Delta on the bottom here. Even though we already have one Terminate, I am going to put the other one on. I am going to put this one on top because it is one of the best cards in the matchup, just being able to go ahead and kill one of the big threats. There's not that many threats in the matchup, Death Shadow, Tassier, and Gurmag Angler being the big ones, so Terminate kills all of them for only 2 mana, and if our opponent, say, has another discard spell and takes one of our Terminates, we might want the backup one. And this is looking like it could be a longer game as compared to the first game. It's true that we don't actually have one of our big threats yet, but we should have time to grind out the game a little bit. So let's see what we can find off of this Thought Scour. And I don't think we're at the point where we really need to be dealing ourselves much damage. We don't actually have the Death Shadow in hand. And even if we did, it would probably just die to an opposing removal spell. On the other hand, it looks like our opponent does have a Death Shadow and is aggressive. They are aggressively dealing themselves damage. So if our opponent has Death Shadow plus something like a Stubborn Denial to back it up, that could be very bad. But it looks like it's going to be Snapcaster Mage getting back likely the Thoughtseize. So it is going to be Thoughtseize. And our hand is pretty good. Pretty Thoughtseize proof. Our opponent is probably going to take either the K command or the Snapcaster. I would think it would be... I mean, Snapcaster plus K command is great, but it also costs a lot of mana, so... I would think that our opponent would take the K command and leave us with the Snapcaster, but hard to know because we can also go Snapcaster plus Inquisition. So, alright, it looks like our opponent is going to take the Snapcaster, which I think is also perfectly reasonable. The Gurmag Angler is a nice pickup. So we can play that, or we can play this Colligan's Command. And our opponent is all the way down to 6. So it's possible we could just ride this Gurmag Angler all the way to the finish line. If our opponent doesn't have a Terminate for it. So that is pretty appealing. Now, if our opponent does terminate the Gurmag Angler, it is going to set us back a decent amount. If we were to cast the Colligan's Command, we would have the choice of which modes to use. But I think I like the aggressiveness of the Gurmag Angler. The upside is very high if our opponent doesn't have the Terminate in hand. We are going to have to exile a good portion of our graveyard, so I'm actually going to go ahead and use this fetch land right now. And this time, I believe we do want to go ahead and deal ourselves some damage. And the reason why I'm using the fetch land is so we have another card we don't care about exiling with the Gurmag Angler. So I'm going to keep definitely the Snapcaster Mage and also this Fatal Push in the graveyard. Although maybe it should have been another card other than the Fatal Push, because we do have multiple removal spells already in hand. So our opponent has a Thought Scour of their own. But yeah, it's going to come down to whether our opponent is able to get rid of this Gurmag Angler, or if they have a big threat plus maybe a Stubborn Denial, that would be good too. But overall, that Gurmag Angler was a big draw step for us, because it gets around cards like Fatal Push. There's 4 Fatal Push in most of these decks. So there is the card, the Death Shadow. And perhaps we will also see a Delve creature as well in this spot. So it is going to be Tassiger. So we're happy to have both of these Terminates in hand. And we are going to be wanting to get rid of both of these creatures. I'm going to start with the Death Shadow, I think, because we can also just attack through this board with our Gurmag Angler, as we do have the Terminate as backup. No reason not to Thought Scour ourselves here. And that's a nice pickup as well. Tasker the Golden Fang. So I like the attack here. It basically forces a chump block with this Snapcaster Mage. And our opponent is going to chump block. So now we can follow up with Tassiger. And I'm not actually sure we use the Terminate, because if our opponent does have another Death Shadow, we want the Terminate for that. So yeah, kind of talking myself into just playing this Tasker and passing. If our opponent had Stubborn Denial, probably would have left mana up on that last turn for it, so I think it's unlikely that that's the case. Now, if our opponent doesn't play a creature here, we can Terminate end of turn. The other reason to not terminate main phase is if our opponent does have a second copy of Tassiger, which is also a possibility. These decks do typically play 2 Tassigers. So we're putting our opponent in a tough spot. If they have cards like Fatal Push or Lightning Bolt, they're not going to match up well against our board. Even a Colligan's Command would be a little bit slow. Our opponent could bring back a Death Shadow, but we do still have that Terminate plus a K command of our own. So I think, once again, we're in a pretty good spot. So our opponent actually either had a Terminate or just found it. And so there goes the Gurmag Angler. That's pretty unfortunate, but we potentially just have the win here. If our opponent doesn't have Stubborn Denial, we can get rid of our opponent's Tasker and then Colligan's Command to deal our opponent 2 damage. We drew an Inquisition, so I don't see much of a downside to casting it. Perhaps our opponent has a Snapcaster Mage to flash in as a chump blocker. And looks like they're just not flashing it in, so they quickly take this Snapcaster Mage, and then we have lethal. And we're just able to get under our opponent this game. Doesn't matter what the other mode is, as long as we are dealing our opponent 2. And that's going to do it.